Hey guys, it's Blyboy, and today we'll be going over the Batman villain known as Mr. Bloom. Now, Mr. Bloom is a very cool looking character, and he's also kind of reminds me of Slenderman by the way he stands and his stature and stuff, but he's just really kind of creepy. I mean, we don't really know much about his past, but let's go ahead and get into the character. So, during the reboot in the New 52, there was an event called Zero Year, and this was kind of like a rewriting of Batman's origin. It's kind of like their version of Year One. And in this story, you had Batman taking on the great mind of Edward Nygma, who had taken over the city and was threatening to completely drown it after this storm had happened. And I think that might be one of the plots of the new Batman movie, but I'm not sure yet. But anyway, after Zero Year had ended, Batman and Gordon dealt with this case that had to do with this kid. He was found on the beach and he died from blunt trauma. So apparently he had fallen. And what we find out is that he went to Penguin when he was still alive, and he was like, look, I got a deal for you. You can use my bodega for crime, whatever you want, but just make sure you pay me. Well, he starts getting fed up with all the crap that happens at his bodega, and it just does not go well. He ends up getting pissed off with one of the people at the bodega, and he goes into a complete fit of rage and ends up beating one of them to death, causing complete chaos. The place ends up going up in flames after this whole interaction, and then he's shot by a cop while walking home. Well, what we didn't know before this is the kid survived, because according to the cop, when he came back, when he was telling Batman, the kid was gone. He had run away. And the cousin of the kid told him, like, look, my cousin, he was tired of getting pushed around, and there's this legend of this guy who stands at the end of this alleyway where they say the gardens grow higher than most, and there's this guy named Mr. Bloom that people would go to if they wanted extraordinary powers. And so he meets with this guy that they call Mr. Bloom, and Bloom gives him this little bit of serum, and the serum gives him these abilities. And so Peter, the guy that they found dead, kind of tried to become this like vigilante and take on Penguin's gang. Well, this didn't work because while he was trying to fly off, the cops shot him and he fell to the ground. We soon would find out that this Mr. Bloom was actually his cousin who was trying to make a big difference. However, this failed very badly when some random person ended up stealing the identity of Mr. Bloom and stealing the serum. After the events known as Batman Endgame, in which Joker gets fed up with the game between him and Batman and lays all the cards on the table, the story ended with Batman and Joker seemingly dying under a cavern in Wayne Manor after they have this brutal fight to the death. However, Batman comes back, but he has amnesia and doesn't remember who he is, and so James Gordon becomes the new Batman, which was a very weird decision. And during this time, you had the Mr. Bloom, who this was his first appearance, but chronologically, he's the second Mr. Bloom and the current Mr. Bloom. But anyway, he was kind of like James Gordon's Joker. And he goes to Bruce for info on these seeds, which is like this new drug, a super drug being sold to criminals, and Bruce doesn't know what to tell him. James, however, finds a lead that makes him having a conflict with these people called the Devil Pigs, who work for Mr. Bloom. While this is all going on, Mr. Bloom is making a deal with Penguin trying to sell his seeds. And Penguin's like, this is a great thing, I'd love to buy him. However, they quickly try to screw over Mr. Bloom by shooting him in the head and burning the body. Now, unfortunately for them, this doesn't do crap, because Mr. Bloom quickly shoots vines from his fingers, and they start stabbing all the different gang members, and then also stabbing Penguin. And then we get this lovely shot of Mr. Bloom hanging over Penguin, looming menacingly. While this is going on, James Gordon finally beats the Devil Pigs, and he gets out of there. However, things don't go according to plan, because once the police find out about this, they're like, yeah, this isn't going to slide. We got to get rid of this whole new Batman thing. While this is going on, Mr. Bloom attacks two guards guarding this blimp that is like this base, almost like the Batcave for this version of Batman. And he ends up crashing this blimp into the assembly where they're about to disband the Batman program. And when he crashes in, he makes his grand entrance, killing people with his viney fingers and stabbing them. Almost very similar to how Heath Ledger introduced himself to everyone in that party scene. And James Gordon, he shows up in the Batman costume, and he attacks Bloom. Bloom and him get in a good fight, but he's eventually beaten after James throws a batarang at him that Mr. Bloom ends up catching, and he turns on the magnet of the blimp, causing him to get pulled into the magnet, but it doesn't take him down because he disappears. After Mr. Bloom disappears, Gordon ends up following a lead that leads him to this place called Blossom Avenue, which is where the original Mr. Bloom sold his stuff at, and this used to be where rich Gothamites would go to buy flowers from the poor kids. He finds out this is the hideout of Mr. Bloom, and Mr. Bloom takes over the mech suit that this Batman uses, and this brutal fight ensues where James Gordon is forced to fight the suit that he usually wears. Now, luckily, he's able to blow up the suit and defeat it, but Mr. Bloom intervenes and has him pinned to the ground using his scaly fingers. Luckily, he is able to beat Mr. Bloom by shocking him, then knocking him over the head with the head of the mech suit, which then leads to Mr. Bloom getting ragdolled out of the window and ends up allowing James Gordon to arrest Mr. Bloom. This is going on. You have Duke Thomas trying to make Bruce Wayne remember who he is by taking him into a subway tunnel and literally seeing the image of a bat. And back to Gordon, they're transporting Mr. Bloom to prison, and things go from good to bad very quickly, as it seems a cult of Mr. Bloom's has appeared on the scene wearing the moniker of what Mr. Bloom wears, and they have his pills as well, so they have his powers. And they end up stopping the transport that they're transporting him with, and unfortunately for Gordon and everyone in Gotham, he escapes and causes total mayhem. Like, this dude is just crazy. Like, the way he talks, like, I don't even understand what he's saying. No one does. He has no true motive. Like I said, he's like the Joker. But he tells them, like, look, I've planted seeds around Gotham. All those who were treated bad and were poor, they had their chance to take back the city. And that's when a whole bunch of Batmechs show up to try to take him down, but they do nothing to him. And that's when a light shines up in the sky, and on that light is the original Batman, Bruce, who has regained his memory and has returned to being the Caped Crusader, now sporting the Rebirth suit that we all know and love. And he jumps into action to take on Mr. Bloom, because who better to take on this threat than the real Batman himself? Now, Mr. Bloom, when he first encounters Batman, he's like, oh, sweet, I finally get to fight the original. I have this great respect for you, but you're not fixing to ruin my plans. And so they get into it. And somehow during the fight, Batman runs away and grabs his Batmech, and they get into like this big fight across the street. While this is going on, Mr. Bloom's able to bring down the mech and is about to probably kill Batman once again when Gordon, he gets the idea to grab his mech and use the magnet in the blimp. And the blimp ends up pulling Mr. Bloom into the magnet, which quickly takes him out and, gets rid of him fairly quickly, and, it gets rid of the problem. After being locked up, Mr. Bloom was put in Arkham. And as you all know, as I mentioned in my Peacemaker video, Arkham got blown up in the event known as A-Day. So a lot of villains were killed in Arkham, Mr. Bloom being one of them, sadly. However, fret not, Mr. Bloom is kind of still alive because he is now part of something called Task Force Z, led by Red Hood, which is a bunch of villains who were killed in Arkham brought back by something called the Lazarus Risen. But yeah, that's Mr. Bloom. If you guys did enjoy the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next one.